right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Men's Alliance Podcast. Super special guest today. Really excited to have Bill Federer with us on the podcast. Bill, thank you for being here, brother.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Man, if you don't know Bill Federer yet, you are in for a real treat today. Historian, author, best-selling author, extensive knowledge on American history, Bible, and Constitution. I first started hearing you, Bill, speaking about Islam, and I was in a group that was studying the rise and the spread of Islam, and we watched one of your YouTube videos. And that's what led me to a couple of your books. And so, I read What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran. Great book. I highly recommend. And then American Minute, which is a great book as well. And you've written how many books? How many books have you written?
Oh, about 30 books. And
30.
Just came out with a new one.
And a brand new one.
It's called Courageous Christianity, how a 19th century religious revival sparked the YMCA athletic movement and this youth mission movement to save the world. And basically the YMCA was a catalyst for revivals. And you had Charles Finney and then D.L. Moody and Chicago and Billy Sunday, the baseball player in the 1880s, right? He ended up working at a YMCA. And Teddy Roosevelt is sort of the epitome of the muscular Christianity movement. The Olympics were brought back based on YMCA athletes, and just a phenomenal amount of things that happened. But it was this quote out of the front. So there was a school in England, and you'll know what game was started at this school when I tell you that the name. It's in a town called Rugby, England, and it was a school in Rugby, England, and the boys would fight, and so the leader of the school Thomas Hughes came up with this idea of, instead of boys fighting, that you would have an organized sport so they could sort of fight with rules. And he named it rugby. And,
How about that?
and then that evolved into football. But he says muscular Christians have hold at the old chivalrous and Christian belief that a man's body is given to be trained and brought into subjection and then used for the protection of the weak. So this idea that God wants you to be strong. Why? Because then you can defend the defenseless. You can rescue the orphan and the widow, rebuke the oppressor, right? Weakness invites aggression. Weakness, it's the law of the jungle. You have a bunch of wolves and you have a weak animal, it's going to attack them. But you show strength, well, then they'll stay away. And so we need to have strong Christian men to defend the innocent and the women and the children. And so this is, God wants to bless you. Why? So that you can establish the covenant, right, with his people, that you can, God told Adam, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, right? So you have to go out there and do something, but you have to be strong to do it. The Apostle Paul, he's filled with athletic analogies. Run the race. I don't box like I'm boxing the air. You want to keep my body in fit. And so, anyway, so it's a fascinating book. It's available on Amazon or my website, AmericanMinute.com.
Man, I love it. I'm looking forward to that. The YMCA, as you and I were just talking about a minute ago, started off incredible. Very similar missions to Men's Alliance, and what we're doing in this country now, that so many organizations like that have drifted from their original mission. And the old term that was used, muscular Christianity, is really a great term. And and we're doing our small part here in Men's Alliance to bring that back and say, yeah, physical strength is important. It's good. It's necessary to be the protectors and the providers that we are called to be. So I'm excited to see that you and your son have written about this. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and the discipline that it takes to keep your body in shape spills over with a spiritual discipline.
That's right.
Of praying, and then also self-control. All right, keeping your passions. A fire in a fireplace is good. It can heat the home, cook the food, but a fire outside of the fireplace is bad. It can burn the whole house down. A river that keeps within its banks is good, but if not, it can flood and destroy. And so men have passion, they have energy, testosterone, and you just have to channel it and keep it under control. And it can do great good. It can be mobilized. You don't just, there's actually a study done by J.D. Unwin. He's a Oxford anthropologist, published a book in 1934 called Sex and Culture. So this is before the 1960s sexual revolution. This is 1934. And J.D. Unwin studied 80 major civilizations over 5,000 years of time. And he saw trends, right? Babylonians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Israel. And the trend he saw was sexual promiscuity always precedes the collapse of a civilization. It's like, what? Because, he said civilizations go through 4 stages: a period of pain and poverty, war, famine, and they make it through and they work hard and they get productive. And then they work together and they become patriotic. And then they finally achieve prosperity. And then they want to enjoy the prosperity and they get pleasure focused and promiscuous and lustful and lazy, and they get conquered by the next rising civilization. And he called it a sexual marketplace. He says when women as a group say nothing happens unless there's a commitment. Well, the guys make the commitment and then go out and work hard to provide for their wife. And then something happens, little kids appear. And the guy has another emotion of being protective of his wife and family. And so when all the men of the country are being productive and protective of their wives and kids, the whole country gets productive and protective. Rising water floats all boats, and it gets creative and innovative and expansionistic and even militaristic. But when the women as a group say there does not need to be a commitment, then water seeks its own level. You have a bunch of guys getting pleasure focused and indulgent and selfish and the irresponsible. And then there's fewer kids born to fill the ranks of the military. And the kids that are born don't have a dad around, and they become rebellious and undisciplined. And when enough of the men of the country do this, the country gets weakened. And then it gets conquered by the next rising civilization. And so he said it's irreversible. He says once a nation gives in to the sexual pleasure, it's like breaking the dam, and you can't put the water back in because human nature wants the pleasure. And now in ancient Israel's case, they lasted the longest, about 400 years, because they had a big magnet in the sky called God, and you were virtuous because you were accountable to God. But Greece didn't have that. It had a bunch of fickle deities like, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and the temple had temple prostitutes. And it's like, how are you going to be accountable to a God like that? No, it's the God of the Bible that is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair. He's going to hold you accountable. That would give the longest last to self-government. And ancient Israel eventually fell. And so here we are. We have one new advantage. In the New Testament, you get filled with the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit on the inside of you is this constant one that convicts you of sin and pulls you back to the Lord. And so I'm believing for a revival.
Man, to your point about the sexual promiscuity and the pleasure seekingness of a society that precipitates its downfall, I think even specifically within that category, specifically, one of the things that precipitates a society's downfall is pedophilia. I know Bill O'Reilly's book, Killing Jesus, he talks quite a bit about this. And it was shocking to see how the Greek cultures and then the Roman cultures began, openly celebrating pedophilia, and even
and Islam does that.
So that's what I wanted to get us to, and I think even just even just, 15 or so years ago in America, people would have shuddered at that and been like, well, that will never happen here. And now, of course, 2025, we already see the push to normalize that, and it begins with changing the terminology used from pedophilia to minor attracted persons, right? And trying to normalize this as a thing. And it's like, man, we are headed right down that same path as all these other civilizations have gone before us, where that's usually the last straw in there before their steep decline, right?
Yeah, John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1819, and he said, "Have you ever found in history the example of one civilization that has become totally corrupt that has ever returned to virtue? Can you tell me how to prevent a luxury from producing effeminacy?" He said, "No effort in favor of virtue is lost." And so you're right that whenever a nation is corrupt, they treat little children and women terrible, and they sacrifice children. The cannibals on the different Polynesian islands, in China, they would kill the girl children because they wanted the boys. India, a similar thing. And then you have, in Islam, a guy can have 4 wives, and they can divorce the wife by simply saying, "I divorce you." The big Muslim university in Cairo said, all you have to do is text your wife 3 times, "I divorce you," and she's gone. No alimony. I mean, she's out the door. And then you can replace her with another wife.
And that's modern day, obviously. You can text her.
Yeah.
So this is a current thing.
Yeah, and so my daughter went on a mission trip with YWAM to Indonesia and Thailand, and they were helping girls to get out of prostitution, where they were making hundreds of dollars a night to weaving baskets and making a couple dollars a day. But they were happy because, "I know Jesus 3 months. How long you know Jesus?" And she said they'd sing their praise songs and just be weeping, and they'd get rejected by their family because the family would send them into town to be prostitute to send money back to the family on the farm. And then no more money's coming back. And so they tell these poor girls, if you're a really good prostitute, in your next life, you get to be reincarnated as a man. My wife said, "That's from going from bad to worse." But you see these other religions treat women bad. I remember back in National Geographic, remember those magazines, and it had a picture of a guy smoking a cigarette, and then behind him is a pile of sticks, and it said an Albanian man and his wife. It's like, his wife. Well, under the sticks is this woman. She's hunched over and she's got this rope and she's carrying all these sticks up a hill while he's smoking a cigarette. She's a pack animal, right?
Yeah.
And so in the Bible, where it says the man shall leave the father and mother and cleave to the wife, and the two shall become one, two means that they're equal. A little study to help men appreciate women. What was the last thing that God created? Well, man. But what was the last thing? Well, woman.
Yeah.
Right? He makes Adam in God's image, and then it says that God brings all the animals to him, and he sees there's a male, female, male, female, male, female, and Adam's like, and then Adam gets depressed, and he says it is not good that man should be alone, and then it says he puts Adam to sleep, takes out a rib, but the Hebrew says a side, takes out a side of Adam. Well, what side? Well, maybe all the intuition and the mothering and the nurturing and the communication skills and the relationship and that
the caution.
Yeah, that sixth sense that women have that I just don't feel good about that person, or they know the baby's too quiet, something's wrong. They and then the beauty and the attractiveness. And so Adam woke up the next day and said, "I'm half the man I used to be." And we sort of know that because a guy will introduce his wife and say, "This is my better half," right?
Yeah.
And so when you read, and the woman is the only thing that wasn't made out of dirt. Right? Everything else made out of dirt. Adam's out of the dust of the ground, but woman, like, she's more refined. And then God's a creator. And if you're going to create something, and this is the last thing you're going to create, you want somebody to appreciate it. And so the woman's the epitome of beauty and all the different characteristics, and that what we so appreciate. And he brings her to Adam so that Adam can admire her. I mean, imagine you're a great artist and you have a house full of, sculptures and paintings, but you're the only one in there. It's like, at some point you want somebody else to admire it, right?
Yeah.
But so Genesis chapter 5 says, these are the generations of Adam in the day God created him. Male and female created he them, and he called their name Adam. He called their name Adam. So God creates Adam, calls him Adam, takes half out, brings half back, and God's still calling him Adam because they're one. The man shall leave the father, mother, cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one. Adam's the one who called Eve, Eve. And Eve means mother of all living, or mother of the living one, because God told the serpent, the seed of the woman is going to crush your head, right? And so, but from God's point of view, they were still one. So it's interesting, the same woke spirit that attacks, kids, wants to mutilate them, always attacks marriage.
Yeah.
Right? That wants to have, polygamy or any type of other situation. But in God's point of view, it's sacred. And then you look at the whole of scriptures in the book of Revelation, it says that, behold, the new Jerusalem coming down as a bride for the groom. And Paul says that we're the bride of Christ. And so this is something sacred in God's eye. And so we need to value the woman and the man's role in protecting and providing for her.
God created the woman last. It was the culmination of his creation. It's where he ended. It was like after woman, it was done. He made this great person of beauty and design. And so I see feminism as such a distortion of the creative order of God, right? By trying to get women to be like men or trying to get women to be equal to men is really a step backwards. It's a regression for women to try to be like men. In fact, women should be celebrated for their unique qualities and their unique design and their ability to do things men cannot do, like create life inside of them. And I feel as a culture, trying to get women to be more like men is antithetical to God's design for women to be different than men and wholly unique from men, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that the more feminist a woman is, the less feminine they look.
Yeah.
I mean, butch haircuts and no jewelry. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get
That's
into
a great point. They're using the word feminism, but they're not feminine.
Yeah, it's sort of bizarre. But ancient Israel, wicked King Manasseh, he's sacrificing children to Molech. And it's sort of interesting that you always have the sin of sexual indulgence tied together with murder. It's like, what? Yeah, it's whenever they back then they would have sex with these temple prostitutes or whatever, but then they would kill the kids. Or in worship of Baal, Baal was the male fertility god, pictured as a big pole that stuck up anyway, like, the Egyptian obelisks and so forth, but it all was symbolic and won't get into it all. But then Ashtaroth or Esther or Easter, right, Astarte, that was the female goddess of fertility. But the way that these agricultural communities, they would sacrifice a child to Baal so that they would have fertility. For their crops anyway, but it was evil and God hated it. And so Manasseh was filling Jerusalem with the blood of the innocent. And the prophets come to him and tell him, God's fed up. You're doing the same thing that the people that were here before Israel came in were doing. And because they were doing it, and God's a just God, and there's nothing more unjust than killing an innocent baby that didn't do anything wrong. And he's a just God. God's going to judge you. And because So he said God brought Israel in to judge the Canaanites who were doing this. But since
Right.
the Israelites are now doing it, God is going to drive them out. Well, judgment was pronounced, but Manasseh has a grandson named Josiah. 8 years old, he becomes king. Teenager, he starts to seek the Lord. Early 20s, he tells him to clean out the temple that his granddad had trashed. And they find the law of God. And they read it to this young king. He rips his garments and repents, sends messengers to a prophetess in town named Huldah, the wife of the king's tailor. And she says, tell the man that sent you that judgment is coming, but not during his lifetime, because he repented when he heard the words of the Lord. And so for the rest of the 31-year reign of Josiah, there's peace and prosperity. And he tears down sodomite temples. He sends the Levites out to teach the law. And during that revival is when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got turned on to the Lord. And then he had a big Passover. They said it was the biggest Passover ever. And so for the rest of the 31-year reign of Josiah, there's peace and prosperity. So the judgment was pronounced, but God put off the judgment during the reign of Josiah because he repented. So I'm praying for a Josiah generation.
Yeah.
That we rend our hearts and that we return to the Lord. And he says, okay, I'm going to put off all the judgment and give another generation. I'm not an end time scholar, but I sort of think that, maybe one of the reasons it's hard to pin down any date is because if we repent, God can put it off.
Amen. Thrivent is proud to support Men's Alliance's goals, and financial advisor Dr. Andrew Newman, call sign Sage, is excited to help tribe members and those they care about make financial choices guided by their Christian values. Faith is what fuels Andrew. Does it fuel you too? Call Andrew today at 612-246-0725 so you can take care of yourself and those you care about, including your local tribe and Men's Alliance. Well, that certainly makes sense. And I agree with you that I'm hoping and praying for a Josiah generation in this country to postpone the obvious judgment that we deserve. Bill, one of the things that I want our listeners today to hear from you that really profoundly informed and shaped me was about the rise and spread of Islam. Is a story that too many American Christians are ignorant on. Only know the sanitized version that the History Channel puts forward, which is laughable. So tell us in your words, as only you do so well. Tell us about describe the rise and the fall of Islam.
Yeah, well, I have a book, and I think I've got a copy of it here on my desk. But as you mentioned, it's called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam in the United States. And Muhammad's the DNA. So we have to understand him before we can understand his followers. And so Muhammad was a religious leader in the pagan city of Mecca for 12 years and only made 70 converts. Little background. Muhammad was born in 570 AD. His father dies before he's born. His mother dies when he's 6. His grandfather and guardian dies when he's 8. He's orphaned, taken in by an uncle, Abu Talib, who's a merchant who takes him on camel rides. And he goes to different cities, hears about different religions. And he goes to the Persians, the Zoroastrians, who believed that paradise was filled full of virgins that would fulfill all the guy's desires. And he likes that, and it gets incorporated into his belief system. The Zoroastrians believed in jinns or genies. And so there's a lot of genies, right, in the Islam, the 1001 Arabian Nights. And then he goes to pagan cities and hears about their pagan religion. So in Arabia, in Mecca, they had a Kaaba, a square building, and they had idols for 360 different pagan gods. And the most popular was Hubal, the moon god. And their calendar began with the first sight of the crescent moon over the desert. And so the crescent was their symbol. And they had a rock they thought had fallen from the moon. They'd kiss the rock, walk around the rock, bow to the rock. It was a glass meteor that hit the desert sand in this brown glass. And so Muhammad kissed this rock. And this is what the pagans did. And so he incorporated that into his belief system. There was the Sabaeans, and they, would stone Satan, and they would, I don't know, female circumcision, cut off arms and legs, and so some of that got incorporated into his belief system. And then there's the Jewish faith, and so Muhammad could not read his whole life. He could not read. He was illiterate, which was not uncommon at that time. And so he never read the Old Testament, but he heard their oral stories called Talmud and Mishnah. And some of those stories got reflected in his belief system. And then the Christian faith. And in Arabia, there were some heresies. And one were the Ebionites, who believed that Jesus was a created being and so forth. And so even Encyclopedia Britannica stated of Muhammad, the gospel was made known to him through apocryphal and heretical sources. So Muhammad thought the Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. Nobody ever explained to him the Holy Spirit. And, 2 centuries after Jesus was the infancy gospel of Thomas, little fanciful stories that nobody takes serious because it's written 2 centuries after Christ, and there's all kinds of stuff in it that shows the person that wrote it knew nothing about life in Israel at the time. And so that's why it's not in our Bible. But those stories were floating around the desert, and he heard them, and guess what? They got incorporated into the Quran as fact. So when Jesus was playing with a playmate, and the playmate falls off the roof of a house and dies, and Jesus raises the kid from the dead and made clay birds and clapped and they flew away, all those stories are in Islam, and they take them as fact. But we know where they came from, this infancy gospel that nobody takes serious. Anyway.
It's like he copied the answers off the wrong kid in class.
And so now he was at first very excited about his faith. He thought there was something in it for everybody, and it would unite the world. And so he goes into Mecca and he starts sharing his faith, and nobody likes it. They like what they've been doing. And so in 12 years, he only makes 70 converts. He gets confrontational. And the people of Mecca said, look, we're tolerant. We tolerate all these different religions, and we're tolerating you, but now you're getting too exclusive. And so they chase him out of town. 619 AD, his year of sorrows, his wife Khadijah dies. Now, a little background on her. So he was working for Khadijah. She's 40 years old, widowed twice, and he's 25. And she decides to marry him. And so since she's wealthy, he doesn't have to work anymore. So he goes out to a cave and prays, which is what the Christians were doing at the time. There was a movement that swept through Christianity called Pietism that said if you really become a Christian, you should give away your money and live in a cave as a hermit or join a monastery and take vows of silence. And so Muhammad goes out to a cave and prays. And in the hadith, it says a spirit appeared to him and squeezed him and commanded him to read. He said, I cannot read. Spirit squeezed him a second time and said, read. He said, I cannot read. Spirit squeezed him a third time and said, read. So then the Spirit sat on him and he began to recite. And that's how the Quran came to him. He'd get these verses, he'd memorize them, he'd recite them. And the word Quran means recitation. It's an oral thing. And you think, how can somebody that's illiterate memorize all these verses? Well, in Arabic, they had a little rhyme to them, a little beat, very similar to rap music today. So maybe there's a student that can't read, but he can memorize these long rap songs and gathers a crowd around him, and they're all listening. And so Thomas Carlyle wrote of heroes and hero worship. He says, Arabs see more method in it than we, that these verses have a rhyme to them. And so anyway, so Muhammad, he's in Mecca. He's sharing his new faith. He's really excited. Nobody else is, and they chase him out of town. He tries going to a city called Al-Taif. They don't want him. They pelt him with rocks and stones. He finally goes to a city called Medina. It's a Jewish city, and the 3 Jewish tribes, clans there, and they let him in. And he originally had his followers bowing toward Jerusalem, right? Goes back to Solomon and Daniel. But when the Jews rejected him, he changed the direction to Mecca. And the Jews were tolerant. They let Muhammad stay. He goes into the minority neighborhoods and he organizes a following. We're familiar with the term of community organizer. When his following gets big enough, he goes to the Jewish leaders of the town and pressures them to accommodate him and his followers politically. They do. Now Muhammad's a political leader. And when Muhammad's followers get chased out of Mecca, he allows them to rob the caravans headed back to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing him out of town. And so he became a military leader. And he fought in 66 battles and raids in the next 8 years before he dies. And he uses a catapult when he attacked the city of Al-Taif. And the people said that you're hurling rocks into the city and it's killing innocent women and children. And Muhammad's response was, they are among them. So they got to be killed too. So it's okay to kill innocent women and children to advance Islam because Muhammad did. And since he's the perfect Muslim, his life is the example. And the word for example is Sunnah, which is where we get the word Sunni. And so so he goes into the city of Medina, and the Meccans get tired of their caravan being robbed. So they send an army up, and it's defeated at the Battle of Badr in 624 AD. And Muhammad with 300 defeats 1,000. So he's encouraged by this. And then in, I think, around 627 AD is the Battle of the Trench. And so 10,000 Meccans, they're pagans, they're marching toward Medina to stop Muhammad and his men from robbing the caravans. Well, Muhammad was a brilliant military strategist. He dug potholes and trenches all around the city of Medina, which rendered the superior cavalry of the Meccans useless. You can't charge your horse and camel across a field with potholes and trenches. They'll break their legs. Throws off the battle strategy. So Muhammad goes to some of the Meccans at night, bribes them, and they slip away. He goes to some of the other Meccans at night, and he threatens them, and they slip away. And there's only one group left, and it gets freezing cold for a week. They lose heart and go back to Mecca. And Muhammad's emboldened that his enemies left. He goes back into the city of Medina, where those 3 Jewish clans had let him in. He gets offended at one of the Jewish clans, confiscates their property, chases them out of town. The other 2 keep their heads low, think, well, as long as he's not picking on us. Now he gets offended at the second Jewish clan, and they get offended. He gets offended with them, confiscates their property, chases them out of town. And the biggest tribe sort of keeps its head low and thinks that, well, he's not picking on us. But now there's only one Jewish tribe left. And Muhammad bottles them in their neighborhood for 28 days. And the hadith, the oral tradition, says that he was taking a bath and a spirit appeared to him and said, how can you rest when Allah's enemies are in your midst? He said, where? And it points toward that last Jewish neighborhood. He surrounds them for 28 days. He brings them into the marketplace and he chops off the head of the men. And then he sells the women and children into slavery. So within 5 years of Muhammad coming as an immigrant into the Jewish city of Medina, there's not a Jew left in the city of Medina. They were chased out, killed, or enslaved. And so it's this process of immigrate, increase, eliminate. Immigrate into a host country as a religious refugee. Increase the number of your followers in the minority neighborhoods. And then you have random outbreaks of violence, and the inhabitants of the neighborhood no longer feel safe, move out, and you take over the neighborhood. And they would do this city by city, country by country, region by region. And there's a 1,400-year track record to see this happen. So the Arabs conquered Jerusalem, which had been a Byzantine Christian city, and then they conquered Syria in 648 AD, Caliph Umar. People forget Syria was the first country to completely be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul. The name Christian was first used in Syria until Caliph Umar conquered it in 648 AD. And then the Muslims conquered into Armenia, and then they conquered into Egypt. You had in Egypt, the Coptic Christians were being persecuted by the Byzantine Christians over some doctrinal difference. And the Muslim warriors said, we'll help you Coptics drive out the Byzantines. And they're like, thanks. And well, they drive them out and then they stay. And then they would go to the towns and cut out the tongues of anybody caught speaking the Coptic Egyptian language. And then they brought in Arabic. And then all in North Africa used to be Christian. St. Augustine of Hippo was from Carthage. Today, that's Tunisia. Why? The Christians had taught themselves this pietism where if you're really Christian, you'll withdraw and won't fight. And you'll just, and so Islam just was more or less unopposed, just barreled through North Africa. And then in the year 711, 80,000 Muslims crossed the Strait of Gibraltar into Spain. Spain was a bunch of Visigothic Christian kingdoms that didn't get along. And they would always fight each other. And 80,000 Muslims come across. Their general is Tariq. And he lands at a mountain. And the Arabic word for mountain is Jabal. So they called it Jabal Tariq. Gibraltar. The Rock of Gibraltar. That's Jabal Tariq. That's where Tariq landed with 80,000 men. And in 10 years, he conquered all of Spain. How? He would pick on one kingdom, and the other ones would stand back and say, well, they were always competition for us. And then he'd pick on the next one. And then he'd capture one of the king's sons in battle and say, okay, you better do what I tell you, or else I'm going to kill your son. And one by one, he would take over. In 10 years, they conquered all of Spain. Then they crossed the Pyrenees, conquered southern France. They're finally stopped outside of Paris at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD, exactly 100 years after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. They go from Arabia to Paris in a 100-year military campaign. They had the military advantage of the stirrup. The stirrup, Romans, Greeks would sit on a horse, but they'd sort of just balance. But the stirrup was invented over in Mongolia, parts of India, where they would tie a rope around a horse and leave two loops hanging for your big toes because they would ride barefoot. And then that made its way across the China Silk Road, the Gobi Desert, to Persia. Persians made the stirrups out of leather and metal, and now you could put the full power of a galloping horse behind a sword. So the Muslims got a hold of this brand new steel called Damascus steel. So instead of the Roman swords that were forged, the Damascus steel is where they would hammer it down, then bend it back upon itself, hammer it down, bend it back upon itself, hammer it down. And each time they would hammer it down, it would get thinner and thinner and stronger, like a razor blade. So they could hold the reins of the horse in one hand, their feet in the stirrups, and the scimitar sword in the other. And at a full gallop, they literally could slice somebody in half. And you can't outrun a horse. They were unstoppable. And so at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD, you have Charles Martel, and he has 30,000 of these Franks, and he doesn't want to stand in a field like at the Battle of Bordeaux a couple of years earlier. In one pass, the Muslim cavalry annihilated the entire Frankish army. I mean, here they are charging on their Arabian horses, their stirrups, scimitar swords. In one pass, boom, they annihilated the whole army because the Franks were fighting on foot with heavy metal swords. And so at the Battle of Tours, Charles Martel puts his men on top of a hill in a square. Now, it's hard to charge up a hill, and horses hesitate charging into a square full of people that are packed together. And meanwhile, Charles Martel had arranged for some of his men to sneak into the Muslim camp and free the captives because they fought for religion, but they also fought for plunder. You could have 4 wives plus as many extra women as your right hand possesses. That's one of the hadiths. They just don't have the status of a wife. So you can come back from a battle with some concubines and so forth. But as these spies were letting the booty out of their Muslim camp, a lot of the warriors left the battlefield to go back and reclaim their booty. And the commander, Abdul Rahman, sees his men leaving the battlefield, and he starts yelling and tries to get them back, and he gets distracted. He gets killed. And now the Muslims can't decide who their next commander is going to be. So they pick up and go back to Spain. That was the Battle of Tours, 732 AD. And so 5 years later, Charles Martel learns how to make a stirrup, teaches his men how to fight on horseback. He outlaws the riding of donkeys. Donkeys were a more comfortable ride. He wanted people to ride horses so they would breed horses so they'd have plenty of horses when they needed them for battle.
Okay.
Well, anyway, 5 years later, they win their first battle on horseback. And, they have the Song of Roland, this French, narrative poem. But finally, it takes 700 years to drive the Muslims out of Spain.
Wow.
And Charles Martel's grandson is Charlemagne. And he's the Holy Roman Emperor tasked with defending Europe from Islamic invasion. So that's the year 800. But in 836 AD, 11,000 Muslims invade Rome. And they trash the Basilica of St. Peter's. And they trash the bones of St. Peter. Then they trash the church St. Paul's outside the walls, and they trash the bones of St. Paul. It was after that Pope Leo built a 39-foot wall around the Vatican. So if you ever go to Rome, see the Vatican, there's a big wall that was built to stop the Muslims who were raiding Rome. And so entire Italian cities would abandon the coast and move up into the mountains because they didn't want to get raided. And so they would sell these Christian slaves in Africa, and they would have slave markets. And so Muhammad himself owned slaves, and they enslaved about 1 million Europeans. There were whole Catholic orders in Europe called the Trinitarians, and the head of the order was called the ransomer. And then, but they enslaved about 180 million Africans. So Muhammad was a white Arab, and he owned black slaves. And so, anyway, I've just sort of taken
No,
you
this
through
is
long
amazing.
enough
Like
thought.
I can listen to this all day. Is it true that that Italians before the Muslim invasion had blonde hair, blue eyes, Europeans? And I've heard this, and that it was because of the invasion of so many Arabs that even today they have dark hair, dark eyes. Is that accurate?
Well, I'm not specifically familiar with that, but I am familiar with a large genetic shift because the Muslims would take Christians captive to Egypt and to the Ottoman Empire. And so you would see, Turks with red hair and green eyes. It's like, what's this? Well, that's because the Muslim pirates invaded Ireland. You're like, what? Yeah, Baltimore, Ireland. In the 1600s, Dragut Reis, this Muslim pirate, attacked Baltimore, Ireland, this little town, and rounded up the whole town at nighttime, put them on ships, took them to, Morocco, sold them into slavery. It's like, what? And then they attacked Iceland. Even one of the pilgrim ships in 1625, it filled up with 800 pounds of beaver skins. They sent it back to Europe for trade, and a Muslim pirate ship captured it in the English Channel, took it to Morocco, and sold the crew into slavery. And so the Europeans would pay an annual tribute to the Muslim pirates. And when America broke from Britain, the Tripoli Muslim pirates said, well, America's its own country. It needs to pay its own tribute. And that's when President Obama said, Tripoli was the first country to recognize America's independence. It's like, yeah, because they were demanding tribute. And so Thomas Jefferson sent in our Marines, to defeat them. And, but a couple of notable things. The Turks convert to Islam and conquer what is today Turkey. All 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were wiped out by the Muslim Turks. And the Greek Christians begged the West for help. The West sends help for 2 centuries. It's called the Crusades. When the Crusades end, the Muslims pick up where they left off, and they surround Vienna, Austria in 1529. And then again, they surrounded in 1683. But the first time, when the Muslims were attacking, they captured Constantinople, which was the Christian capital of Europe for 1,000 years. And that's when Columbus set sail looking for a sea route to India and China, because the Muslims had conquered the land routes through Constantinople to India and China. And so Columbus thought he was in India, so he names the people he meets Indians. Think of it, we never would have called Native Americans Indians had it not been for Islamic Jihad. You're like, what? It's like,
So the Crusades, go back to those for a second, because I understand that the Crusades were a defensive battle. That was like a retaliation to try to turned the tides back, right? It was the Muslim invasion into Spain in 711 that actually started the need for crusades, right?
Yeah, so you had the Byzantine Christians were driven out of Egypt, and no sooner were they driven out than the Coptic Christians wanted them back to defend against the Muslims. And there was a emperor around the year, I'm thinking, in the 600s, and he left Constantinople and went over to Rome, and he stripped the gold roof off the Pantheon to get money to get together a navy to go back into Egypt and free Egypt from the Muslims. And the way history has these quirky stories, he was taking a bath, and one of the servants didn't like him and broke a soap dish over his head and killed him. And so the Romans were never able to get another attempt there. But the Christians, now the Muslims did not force the Christians to become Muslim. Why? Because it was the non-Muslims that paid the taxes. Mm-hmm. And the Muslims did not tax Muslims. They taxed the conquered peoples, the infidels and the Jews and Christians, who had to pay the jizya, an annual tax, where they'd make you kneel, grab your beard, slap your face, humiliate you, and take your money. And if you ran out of money and didn't pay the jizya tax, they could take you, your wife, and daughters and sell you on into slavery. And so the Christians were a persecuted minority population. Sort of like today, if you're a Christian in a Muslim country, you're definitely a minority. And so the Christians would go on pilgrimage, and different Muslim leaders would allow pilgrims to come in, but then they got this crazy sultan that tore down the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, brought the Christians up to the altar and slit their throats. And word of this gets back to Europe, that the Christians are getting killed. And so that's when you had, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux and these different ones calling for Christians of Europe to come to the Greek Christians' help. So the same way that the Byzantines and the Coptic Christians had a doctrinal difference, the Roman Catholic and the Greek Orthodox had a doctrinal difference. In 1054 AD, it was called the Great Schism. It was two words in the Nicene Creed. The two words were "and Son." So the Roman Catholic West says the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and Son. But the Greek Orthodox said the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. Now, as important as doctrinal issues are, the Muslims could care less and wanted to kill all of them. But that was the Great Schism that separated the East from the West. And so it was a big humbling for Alexis Comnenus I, the Byzantine emperor, to beg the Catholic West for help. It's like asking the church split to come back and help you out. Mm-hmm. And so the West sends help. It's called the Crusades. Now, the First Crusade sends soldiers to Alexis Comnenus I, and he was expecting them to say, "Here we are, where do you need us?" And he was just going to conquer the next town over, and then the next town and the next town, and gradually work his way back to Jerusalem. May have taken a century. But the Europeans say, "Wait a second, you asked us for help? We've got this. We don't need you anymore." And we told everybody back home that this is a crusade to get Jerusalem. We're going to take Jerusalem. We want that big apple. We want the prize. And they conquered Jerusalem and hold it for a century. But they didn't conquer the land in between Constantinople and Jerusalem. And so it was this constant supply line of ships. And over a while, that got tenuous. And they didn't have enough population. And so then, the Muslims began to coalesce together against the Crusaders and eventually drive them out. And with Saladin, he captured Jerusalem, and then he said that he would let any Christian go if they could pay a ransom. And about 10,000 of them couldn't, so he sold them into slavery. Richard the Lionheart, right, was one of the Third Crusade to try to take back Jerusalem. St. Louis, Missouri, he led the Seventh and Eighth Crusades against the Muslims. And so it's a fascinating history there.
Yeah.
But it was a 700-year crusade called the Reconquista for the Spaniards to drive the Muslims out of Spain. Spain was captured by the Muslims the same way the Middle East was captured by the Muslims. And had Spain not driven them out, it still would have been a Muslim Spain. Matter of fact, I was just with somebody who's a missionary in Spain, and they've gone woke. And the Muslims are beginning to take over Spain again. You're like, what?
Yeah, it seems like they're coming back.
Yeah, he says that the Catholic faith was like the state church so much that a whole lot of people recoiled against it and became, less religious. And then because they were less religious, they sort of let in any type of faith and sexual stuff. And then in comes Islam. And now there's this push to say, oh, Spain, we need to cherish our wonderful Spanish heritage and the Alhambra and all the Spanish architecture that was built by Christian slaves. It wasn't Muslim laborers. They were Christian slaves that built those things, but they want to claim that it was their great Muslim heritage they had there. And so now it's resurfacing this very strong Islamic presence in Spain. And but you go back in history and you see that the same way that Spain drove the Muslims out, there was this effort to drive the Muslims out of this Christian Middle East. I mean, Syria was Christian for 6 centuries. That's longer than America's been around. 6 centuries, all the Middle East was Christian. But then Islam came in and took it over and erased the history. So, and now after World War I, and I don't know how long you want to go, but the Ottoman Empire was founded. There's 2 different kind of Turks: the Seljuk Turks that the Crusades were fought against, and that was around 1071 on. But then you have the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople, and they set up this Ottoman Turkish Empire that lasts for 700 years. And when the World War I starts, the Ottoman Turks did a treaty with Germany. So Kaiser Wilhelm II did a treaty with Sultan Abdul Hamid II over oil. So Germany industrialized but had no oil. Turkey had oil, had Kirkuk in what is today Iraq. Britain has no oil, but Winston Churchill changed the British Navy from coal to oil. And so Britain did a treaty with Persia or Iran in 1908. It's called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, or BP. So BP, British Petroleum, is the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And so when World War I takes place, half of it is in the Middle East. I mean, they're using cannons and poison gas the same way they were using in Europe.
Yeah.
And when the war ends, they redraw the map of Europe, but they redraw the map of the Middle East. Britain takes a chunk of it as a mandate, sort of like America took Puerto Rico and the Philippines as a mandate, right, after the Spanish-American War. And so the British mandate, and then France takes a part, and Russia wants a little sliver, Italy wants a little bit. But I could get into that whole history if you want, but
I want to ask you about this, the kind of the macro level trend of Islam, and what do you see happening in America today? Talk about what's happening here. Is this repeating? Is the same thing happening here? The last I read was that something like by 2050, there will be more Muslims than Christians. Talk to us about what's happening currently in our country.
Right. So the word Islam means submission to the will of Allah. A Muslim is one who has submitted to the will of Allah. And they think there'll be world peace when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. So it's a religion of peace. but their definition of the word peace is different than ours. We define peace as different groups that don't believe the same thing learning how to get along. Their definition of peace is when the whole world submits to the will of Allah, there will be peace. So for a fundamentalist Muslim, world peace means world Islam. Sort of like, Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. He says, both sides declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
North liberty is freeing the slaves. South liberty is getting the North out, right? And so the world, the half of the world that has submitted to Allah is called the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam. And the half of the world that's in the process of submitting to Allah is called the Dar al-Harb, Harb, the House of War. So the non-Muslim world is supposed to be at war because it's in the process of submitting to Allah. Now, a moderate Muslim thinks the world will submit to Allah later, maybe in the distant future, maybe at the end of the world. It's so far off, they really don't think about it. They just want to live their lives, and they're happy to have you as a friend and family. And that's fine. They want to move in our direction. The fundamental Muslim, on the other hand, they think the world is supposed to submit to Allah now. And they're really excited, and they want to help make it happen. The dilemma for the West is the more we show ourselves nice and tolerant, the more the fundamental Muslim views that niceness as weakness. And they take that as an invitation to attack. So historically, whenever they've lost major battles, Battle of Malta, Battle of Lepanto, Battle of Tours, they would go through a generation of more or less rebuilding, but they wouldn't be fighting during that generation until they would do some preemptive strikes. And if there was no retaliation, they'd give the whistle and they would get back onto the war mode. So it's this motto: when you're strong, you attack. When you're weak, you make treaties until you get strong enough to attack.
Mm-hmm.
And so the dilemma for the West is the nicer we show ourselves, the fundamental ones view that niceness as weakness, and they take that as an invitation to attack. Now, the moderate ones prefer to be more westernized. But when the West shows itself weak and the fundamental ones start killing the moderate ones, then they are put in a hard place. I tell people, imagine if a drug gang is encroaching in your neighborhood and they're doing a drug deal on your front lawn. You call the police show up, arrest them. Are you going to call the police the next time? Well, yep, they're right there. But let's say you call the police and they don't show up. Worse yet, the gang leader comes up to your door and says, we have somebody inside the police department. They've snitched and told us that you called on us. If you call again, we're going to kill you. Will you call the police again? Probably not. Mm. And so when the moderate Muslim sees the West being really strong against the fundamental Muslim, they're happy to side with the West. But when the West shows itself weak and starts giving out candy and soccer balls and being, they said, then it encourages them to become more violent. Mm. But then you add in one more ingredient: communism. So after World War II, countries in Europe wanted to have republics and be free and elect leaders, but the Soviets didn't like that, so they would send in KGB agents to do critical theory, where they would observe all the groups in a country: economic groups, racial groups, Bosnians, Croats, Serbs, religious groups, Sunni, Shia, Orthodox, didn't matter, and they would classify them as victims or oppressors, haves and have-nots. And then they would organize riots. And then they would escalate them into violence and bloodshed. Why bloodshed? Because then people think emotionally and not logically. My friend just got killed. I don't want to sit down and talk theory. And then people want to blame somebody for all the problems, and they co-opt the media to blame the leader of the country for all the problems. And as his popularity falls, they would do a coup or a rigged election, and nobody would defend the guy because by this time they didn't like him. And so this happened country by country by country. It's called Behind the Iron Curtain. And the CIA learns how to do it in reverse. And so The Shah ruled Iran, but then after World War II, he was ousted, and they elected a leader named Mossadegh. But then, lo and behold, he's beginning to side with the Soviet Union, and Eisenhower gives Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, approval to do Operation Ajax, and he sends Kermit Roosevelt Jr. over to Tehran. He's an expert in foreign languages, and he does the KGB thing in reverse. He recruits mobsters and gangsters and radical imams, and they do terrorist attacks and co-opt the media to blame Mossadegh for all the problems. When his popularity falls, they put him under house arrest, lock him away, and reinstall the Shah. And the Shah loved America because we put him in, and until Jimmy Carter abandoned him. But these tactics were perfected. It's called the Cold War, and so when the Middle East, when World War I ends, there's no more Ottoman Empire, and the leaders of these Middle Eastern countries want to be more westernized. You have Faisal, king of Iraq, and he's dressing in business suits, right? You have Ataturk in Turkey, and he's outlawing the fezzes and the burqas in the Arabic language and says Mohammedanism is nothing more than Arab politics, may have suited tribes in the deserts, no good for a modern progressive state. Even John F. Kennedy praised Ataturk in Turkey. And then you had, Gamal Nasser in Egypt. He didn't like the Jews, but he liked to be westernized. He dressed in business suits, and his family was all wearing the latest styles. And Cairo looked like the Southern California with the beach. Syria had beauty pageants. Iran had discos and dance clubs, and Kabul, Afghanistan, girls are going to school with, skirts and everything. And it's all moving in a Western direction until you have the Muslim Brotherhood was started, right, in 1928, and they're fundamentalist Wahhabis, and which is bad enough, and there's a whole history, but it takes on a new form in 1960 when the Soviets form the PLO. Palestinian Liberation Organization was formed in Moscow by the KGB, and so now you see this mixing together of Soviet critical theory tactics of dividing countries into groups mixed with Islamic Wahhabism, the fundamental religion, and you have a toxic mixture. And so these fundamentalist Muslims would target and assassinate the moderate leaders of these Muslim countries. So the leaders would want to be more westernized, dress in business suits, right? But their wives, would want to wear Western dresses and clothes, but they didn't want to get assassinated, and so they would have to, lean a little bit toward the fundamental ones, so they wouldn't have some plot against them. And so Anwar Sadat, he's a moderate Egyptian leader. He makes a treaty with Menachem Begin of Israel. This is wonderful. Billy Graham praises Anwar Sadat for having the courage to stand up to those fundamentalist ones and make this peace treaty. Pat Robertson praised Anwar Sadat, and they were having a military parade. And the soldiers are going by, but then some of the Muslim Brotherhood type people that infiltrated the military stop, turn, lower their guns, and kill the president of the country in front of everybody, and wound Mubarak. And so you have this, and so Mubarak in Egypt was doing this fence sitting, right, trying to not get assassinated, but wanted to be pro-West until Obama came in. And Obama disinvited Mubarak from a meeting and filled the room with Muslim Brotherhood people. And then Obama was able to use social media and Facebook to organize the Arab Spring to overthrow these moderate countries and put in fundamental ones. And then there's a whole other aspect. Again, we think of two sides like a chess game. It's more like Chinese checkers. There's more multiple sides. Yeah. And so while we have the fundamental Muslims and the moderate Muslims in America and Israel, then you have the Soviets. And so the Soviet-Afghan War, the U.S. CIA, its largest covert CIA operation, is arming and training the Taliban to fight the Soviets. Sylvester Stallone did his movie on it, Rambo 3. And Tom Hanks did a movie on it called Charlie Wilson's War.
Yeah.
So this was our CIA arming and training the Taliban, and one of the persons trained was Osama bin Laden. And then you have, but just prior to that, you had Jimmy Carter abandoning our ally, the Shah, and letting the Ayatollah take over Iran. So Iran used to be pro-American. It's hard for us to imagine, but Iran was almost more pro-American than Israel was. Iran was super pro-American. But Jimmy Carter abandoned our ally, the Shah, and helped bring in the Ayatollah. There's evidence that Carter was in communication with the Ayatollah while he was in France, and was there. Zbigniew Brzezinski, right? Mika Brzezinski's dad. He was the national security advisor for Carter. He's part of orchestrating this handing of Iran over to the Ayatollah, and so now you have an Iran-Iraq war. And we certainly don't want Iran to win. So Ronald Reagan, we're arming and training Saddam Hussein to fight Iran in the Iran-Iraq war. And so back then, Saddam was somebody we worked with until George H.W. Wanted to do the New World Order thing. And then you had Bill Clinton, and Reagan. I loved him, but when the Iran began to fund Hezbollah, and the fundamentalist Muslims in Lebanon blew up our Marine barracks, killed 241 U.S. Marines, Reagan's response was to withdraw. This projected weakness, and so in Islam, the fundamental ones, when your enemy is strong, retreat, but when your enemy is weak, attack. Well, we're projecting, we're pulling out, and then you have Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky, and fires missiles into Bosnia. And Bill Clinton funnels weapons through Iran to the Bosnian Muslims to fight the Serbian Christians, right? Operation Deliberate Force. And then you have George W. And the weapons of mass destruction that now they've pretty well admitted it didn't exist. Now, from one point of view, America was exhibiting strength around the world, which helped keep a global order.
Right.
But you see that there's these different sides that are each wanting to benefit. And then the worst is Biden, Afghanistan. 20 years of courageous soldiers fighting to free Afghanistan, losing limbs, and Biden pulls out, gives them $85 billion worth of weapons, and the largest military base between China and the Middle East there, and soldiers that I talked to said we used to own the night, but now they have our night vision goggles. And I was in a Uber in one city, and the guy had an accent. I said, "Where are you from?" He goes, "Afghanistan." He goes, "I'm a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. I was trained by the Americans." He says, "I'm smart. I got my wings." But he said that they got the order to stand down. He says, the Taliban had motorcycles and pickup trucks. He says, we could have taken them out so easily. We got this order to stand down. He said, my friends landed their helicopters in Tajikistan, because if they landed in Afghanistan, they'd get killed. He goes, I had to run for 10 days and hide, and finally contacted my trainer in America, and he got me out. And he goes, now I'm driving Uber and working at Panera. But I'm an educated person. And he said, we were all saying, well, we don't want foreigners to run our country. And so it's okay that America leaves. And he goes, now China runs Afghanistan.
Wow.
Right. He said that Chinese planes were flying in the same time American planes were evacuating out. And he says, soldiers who went back over there to do private contract work, defending a power plant. They're defending the same power plant for the Chinese. Why? Rare earth metals for batteries. And Biden gave it all to China. And, So it's one of these things where there's this the globalists, and the globalists want this one world government, and they see that you need to create crises to reshuffle the deck. Yeah. That as long as the status quo, people. But if you can have a crisis, and they usually want to create the crises and blame it on their innocent opponent. Um, and From my point of view, I think Trump is not a globalist. He's trying to hold back. He's a pro-American, make America great again,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't like it, and so they're resisting him. But I think that we are at this situation where everything's taken more of a global dimension that it's never had before. And anyway, didn't mean to get into all that.
This was so great because, you know, we know the saying, if you don't know history, you're destined to repeat it. And you put this, you know, you weave together this narrative that really spans centuries right there. You just covered centuries of perspective on the ebb and flow of civilizations, especially that of Muslim and Christian.
You know, in my book, I go through the fall of Constantinople.
Yeah.
So it was Christian. It was a Christian city, and you had Venetian arms merchants going to the Greek Christians and offering to help them, but they didn't have any money, and so they began to help the Muslims. And one of them was this Hungarian guy that knew how to make cannons. And when the people in Constantinople couldn't pay him, he goes to Sultan Mehmed II, and he helps him build the largest cannon in the world. It could shoot a 1,200-pound stone cannonball over a mile, and they would drag it and shoot it at the walls of Constantinople. And then there's another Venetian arms merchant, and he's like, well, you're doing it all wrong. You're just willy-nilly hitting all. You got to hit it here, here, and then in the middle, create a V, and that whole section will collapse. They're like, oh, man, thanks a lot. And but here you have, you know, greed, and the one side
Right.
helping the bad people to attack the Christian. And so it's, you know, there's two threads I trace throughout history: greed and the gospel. You always have people motivated by greed, and you always have people motivated by the gospel. And but God chooses for us to be alive at this time in history, and every generation has a crisis, and the crisis is a time for people to show whose side they're on. And some run and hide, and others stand up and defend the defenseless. And Jesus says, "Wheat and tares grow together till the harvest." And so it's a situation where at some point we have to put our lives into God's hands. And there are some things we can control and some things we can't. And what we can control, we need to stand up for righteousness and defend the orphan and the widow. And the other things we have to give to the Lord and say that, you know, he's working his plan. I mean, here's Augustus Caesar, the most powerful leader in the world, Roman armies everywhere. And he wants a worldwide tracking system. He called it a census tax enrollment. If he could have had access to 5G and cell phones and facial recognition software, I bet he'd been tempted to use that, right? World dictators always want to track and control people. And because of his demanding a census, Mary and Joseph had to go to Bethlehem to be counted, where Jesus was born, fulfilling the prophecy that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. So the devil's working his plan, but God is working his plan behind the plan.
That's right.
Well, God is going to have his will be done and be glorified. And so at some point we have to realize that, you know, I tell people, why did God make us? All for fellowship. And before the flood, people were living, not Methuselah, 969 years. And it says, before the flood, the thoughts of man were on evil continually. They chose not to retain God in their thoughts, and it repented God that he even made man. It's like, I made him for fellowship, and they're going on for centuries not even thinking about God. It's like, why did he even make him? One translation says it broke God's heart. And so after the flood, it's like God says, okay, we're going to do plan B. We're going to have shorter lifespans, fluctuating weather, floods, famines. We're going to have, and why? Because people will turn to God in times of crises. Think of yourself or myself, right? We should be praying all the time, but we tend to pray a little bit more when things aren't going too good, right? In a crisis. Well, what's humanity? It's like a bunch of individuals. And so he blesses us, and we sort of put him on a shelf. But if the Bible says he hides his face, he gives us over to our own devices, fine, have it your way. And when things go bad, we turn to him out of desperation, and he's there for us. And it's like, that's what he wanted all along. He wanted us to turn to him. So whether it's Attila the Hun with 500,000 men wiping out cities in Europe, whether it's Genghis Khan killing 30 million from Korea to Hungary, right? With the bubonic plague, Spanish flu, there's always a crisis. Every generation
Right.
has a crisis. This is just our turn. Yes, it is taking more of a global dimension, but when it comes down to each person, it's the same decisions that the person has to make. Is it your welfare that you're looking out for, or is it the orphan and the widow and the innocent, the elderly? It's like the crisis is an opportunity for us to show what's really in our heart.
Oh,
And
that's so good. That's such a great way to sum it up and to look at it. If I weren't a Christ follower, I would hear this story of world history, and it would cause me, despair. Right? It would be a tragedy. But thank God that our hope is not in this world. It's in the next. And really, the words from Mark 8 are coming to mind right now. Those who try to save their life will lose it, but those who lose their life for Christ's sake and the gospel's sake will find it. And so that's a reminder to me that, like, even if and when that crisis comes to us in our lifetime, the goal is not to try to keep our life. The goal is to be willing to lay it down for the gospel, for Jesus.
I often end my talks with the thought, someday you're going to be dead and you're going to be in heaven because you believe that Jesus died on the cross to pay for all your sins. And when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, with no less days to sing his praise than when we just begun, imagine you have been in heaven for 10,000 years and you're walking the streets of gold. You meet Moses. That'd be pretty cool. Maybe Moses will invite you over to his place. I don't know what it's like in heaven, but I bet Moses will have a pretty nice place, right? Jesus, my Father's house, are many dwelling places. He might even have one of those big fireplaces where the logs don't burn up. Get it? The burning bush in the wilderness didn't burn up, and the logs in his fireplace. I heard one preacher say, in heaven, you'll travel as fast as you think. And I'll probably show up late. But let's say he's got a big living room and we all show up, and after the small talk's over, he's sitting right next to you, and you say, Moses, tell us the story. I read the book, I even saw the movie, but here you are in person. Room gets quiet, Moses stands up and he goes, it looked really bad. Pharaoh, the most powerful military leader in the world at the time, was charging in with chariots and swords, and we were totally unarmed. And I just stood there with my staff and I said, God, use me to deliver your people. And the waves came in and swallowed up Pharaoh's chariots. And we're going to say, wow. Then we're going to look around the room and see David. Say, David, tell us your story. He's going to say, it looked bad. 40 days, Goliath is mocking our God, and the grown-ups are too chicken to do anything. I said, well, enough of that. Took my little sling, ran out there, hit him in the head, took his own sword and chopped his head off. And one by one, we're going to go around the room. There's Gideon. I got 300 against 100,000 Midianites in Esther. Whether I die, I die. I'm going to go in and see the king and plead for Israel. And then everyone in the room is going to look at you. So you tell us your story. What did you do when it was your turn to be down there on earth? What were they saying about God in your country? Or the baby that the Lord knew in the mother's womb? Or marriage that God himself instituted, or sex that God made them in the beginning, male and female, not furries or anything else? What did you do when the whole world was against you and everybody's sitting on the edge of their seat waiting to hear? What are you going to say? I'd hate for any of us to be up there and say, well, I threw a couple bucks in the offering plate, or I turned the channel when the girls came on. It's like, no, I said, when I was on earth, man, they were doing all this wicked stuff and abortion. And I said, I couldn't be quiet anymore. I had to do something. Right. And I just stood up, and whether I die, I die. I'm going to let God use me. Right. I mean, I'd hate for any of us to do up there and Jesus walk in the room, and a big screen come down and him show all kinds of great things happening and miracles, and him saying, this is what I had planned for you to do down on earth, but you just didn't have enough faith and courage. And you look back at your life, and that mountain that held you back, right, is a little anthill. It's a little bitty fear of man. You say, I let that fear of man, well, what somebody's going to post about me on the internet, I let that fear hold me back from doing all this great stuff that God had planned for me to do. And you can't go back to earth and do anything else because you're already in heaven because you believe that Jesus died on the cross to pay for all your sin. It's like a basketball game. And Jesus is the coach, and you're on the bench, and he comes over and slaps you on the back and says, your turn, get in the game. And you're like, but coach, they're playing really tough out there. And he goes, yeah, I know. It's your turn, get in the game. It's like, but coach, somebody just got knocked down. He goes, yeah, you're 7 feet tall. They're 4 feet tall. You can do this. Greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord raises up a standard against him. Though 1,000 fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, it shall not come nigh thee. This is your chance. No coach saves the slowest runner till the end of the race. He saves the fastest runner to run the last leg of the relay. You're the last leg, right? I think God and all of heaven is looking down saying, okay, look, we put in the best people. We got Goose. We got everybody in there. And they're like, okay, watch this grand finale, right? It's to say, oh, Lord, looks really bad. Come quickly. It's like, no, he's chosen you. He's given you his word. He's given you his spirit. He's given you great friends. And I love the tribe. I love the goal of the men's alliance that you put together, that we can, God's given us these friends. He's given us, this is your chance out of all of world history. The good Lord decided for you to be alive right now. He knows every globalist plot. He knows all the stuff. He knows stuff that we can't control and the stuff that we can, but he chose for you to be alive right now. And he's got a great plan to use you. God loves to wait until things look hopeless. And then he raises up little nobodies who are small in their own eyes to be big in faith and courage and do great things.
Wow. Praise God, man. What did you do when trouble came to you? What did you do when the enemy came for you? I love that question. I love that visual image you gave us there of sitting around heaven and hearing the stories of these great heroes of the faith, and putting that in perspective of we have a part to play in that as well. And one day we'll sit at that table and we want to be able to share a story of how we stood strong and fought to the end as well. So, Bill, thank you so much for just your knowledge, sharing your wisdom with us, your perspective, but also sharing that encouragement and that great charge that you left us with. Thank you so much for your time, brother.
Well, hey, it's an honor to be on, and I'd be happy to be on anytime in the future. And check out our new book called Courageous Christianity, how the Muscular Christianity movement started the YMCA athletics and a movement to change the world. So,
man, I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about you and your son checking out Men's Alliance and seeing if you guys check out a tribe in your area.
I love it.
I think you guys would absolutely love it. And I appreciate your ministry and all that you're doing, Bill.
Well, hey, thank you, Goose. And AmericanMinute.com is my website. And look forward to hearing more great stuff about what you're doing. And yeah, we're going to check out the Florida tribes and
awesome.
Look to plug in. So
awesome. AmericanMinute.com. That's in the show notes. I encourage you guys, check out more of Bill Federer at his website and in his books and his YouTube videos as well. Wealth of information. I've learned an awful lot through his books and videos in the past. So we've got to keep up this type of sharpening so that we can be better leaders and better men. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
To find out more about what we are doing in Men's Alliance, go to men'salliancetribe.com. This will help you find a tribe near you. We have grown so much over the past few years. There are thousands of tribesmen all over the country in hundreds of tribes. We're growing every single week. Go to men'salliancetribe.com. Find a tribe near you, or maybe you're the man to start one in your area.